34 years ago, India experienced one of the worst outbreaks of organized violence in its modern history, when the assassination of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was followed by the murder of thousands of Sikh citizens in Delhi and in other parts of the country. Today, the date 1984 is synonymous with justice delayed and thereby denied. In 2014, the government of Narendra Modi came to power on an election manifesto that promised to punish all of the guilty and bring closure to the victims of the violence, but they remain disappointed. To discuss what happened in November of 1984 and what has failed to happen since then, we're here with two guests. Hartosh Singh Bal, he's the political editor of Caravan Magazine, who's written extensively about the violence of 1984. And Manoj Mitta, who's the author of two books about episodes of organized violence, one about the 2002 riots in Gujarat and one, When a Tree Shook Delhi, about the 1984 massacre. Hartosh, will begin with you. Can you give us a sense of the historical context of what the events were that preceded the assassination and the riots and led up to them?
See, clearly why 84 is important apart from the question of justice is that it set in place the model of politics that has come to dominate India today. The history of what happened actually goes back to the emergency. The biggest opposition to Indira Gandhi during the emergency came from the Akalis. As soon as the emergency ended, there was a one-point agenda between Sanjay and Indira to bring down the Akalis. They found a man in Bhindranwale who they would prop up. He went out of their hands. Eventually, they had to confront what they had created in Punjab. And they made a mess of it. The planning for Blue Star, the people involved in it were Arun Nehru, Arun Singh, Sundarji, Rajiv and Indira. The idea was that a military victory would be a great way to go into the next elections. And a military victory where a community could be targeted and branded in the same way that Muslims are branded today, and you could organize a majoritarian project, a Hindu majoritarian project against one community. Blue Star happened. Obviously, the assassination was not part of it, but when the assassination happened, the violence was controlled and organized in this context. It was used in the same way that Blue Star would have been used.
In speaking about the larger sort of atmosphere in which a minority was being demonized, Manoj, what do you recall about the 1980s and about that mobilization of sentiment against Sikhs in that period?
Yeah, since we are holding this conversation in 2018, it would be apt to recall that we had this episode of mass violence taking place right in the capital of the country, under the nose of the central government, run by none other than the grandson of Jawaharlal Nehru, right, who symbolizes secularism like nobody else in our country, right. So, why it is important to recall that is because in today's context, the binary is, okay, Congress represents secularism and BJP and its affiliates represent the other view. That is the reason why political scientists have very astutely observed that Congress has a track record of being opportunistically communal, while BJP is ideologically communal, right. So, 84 is the most egregious example of how Congress has had a record of stooping to such methods, when it suited them politically. The kind of, voting that took place in that election meant that Congress party under Rajiv Gandhi got a mandate that even his grandfather or his mother never got, right? 400 plus, a kind of brute majority that nobody before or after got. And in that context, you had people like H.K.L. Bhagat or Jagdish Tytler or Lalit Makan, who were all perceived to have been involved in the violence in some way or the other, in whose constituencies there were extensive killings. They were all rewarded in that election. I mean, Bhagat and Sajjan Kumar got massive majorities. And I may warn you that we should use our language carefully. You loosely refer to it as riots. It's not an apt word to use because we are talking about what is clearly a pogrom. Right. It happened right in the capital of the country, and yes, there was a grave provocation, but then we know from the experience of '84 and other incidents that if the violence is not brought under control within a few hours, it clearly means that there is administrative and political complicity.
Can you give us a sense of what the scene was on the ground in terms of how the police were acting and how politicians may have been responsible?
I think the story is pretty clear, and we can add more details to it. I've documented it was organized centrally in every area of Delhi. Mobs were led, and they were led by Congress leaders. It was almost as if Congress leaders were deputed. They were shouting the same slogans. They were using the same methods of killing. It is impossible in a spontaneous uprising of violence that you would get a uniform pattern of violence across the city without anybody coordinating. Same slogans, same methods of white powder, an inflammable substance. In all likelihood, white phosphorus. It's actually a banned substance under the Geneva Convention in terms of its use in war. It would have been easy if any commission of inquiry was interested to find out where it would have come from. At that time, in 1984, not more than 2 or 3 factories would have been manufacturing white phosphorus. You could have easily tracked down where that trail came from. The coordination, and I'm saying this with full understanding of the implications of this, was Narasimha Rao was called up by several people. He put his hands up. The Home Minister of the country, in all reality, said, I have no control over what is happening. I cannot intervene. He's told several people, including bureaucrats, people from the President's Rashtrapati Bhavan. My understanding is the coordination was happening through Arun Nehru, who was in touch with Rajiv Gandhi, and there was messaging across the city to senior Congress leaders, and mobs were organized. The police was just a handmaiden of the Congress party organizing these riots. The only time the police intervened was to disarm Sikhs who were putting up a resistance. In East Delhi, where more than, see the total death toll across the country, and we must remember it was not just Delhi. 4,000 people died in Delhi, and about an equivalent number of people died outside Delhi as well. Across all of the Hindi belt, you had killings. In East Delhi alone, in a single Tirlokpuri, 400 people in 2 blocks, Kalyanpuri, 200 people more, over 1,000 people killed in East Delhi, 26 arrests. I think you have documented. All 26 arrested were Sikhs. And this is the consistent story. And to add to what Manoj has said, what happens afterwards, unlike 2002, and I don't want to draw a comparison because it was horrendous. Militancy was underway in Punjab. So the monitoring of the process of bringing justice didn't happen even through the media or the liberal intelligence. To use a term current now, it was implicit then that it would have been anti-national to report on the failings of the justice process, because that was the excuse that the militancy in Punjab was using, that justice had been denied to us, which is why we have taken up arms. So literally from almost 84 onwards, except for a handful of reporters, the media abdicated its responsibility to look at how the commissions failed to follow any reasonable process of justice.
Manoj, back to you. You've written a book that with senior advocate H.S. Fulka, who's one of the leaders of the movement and the campaign for justice for the victims. And that book takes a holistic view and kind of integrates the findings of many of the reports that have washed up like waves following investigations into the violence. Tell us, can you give us a sense of what, up till the beginning of this government, of this present government, what is the record of previous governments in actually prosecuting the perpetrators?
See, in these 3 odd decades that have lapsed, there have been about a dozen committees and commissions. 2 of those commissions. It's unusual for a single episode to be inquired into by 2 commissions of inquiry. Something like that had to happen here because the first commission of inquiry, which was headed by a sitting judge of the Supreme Court, Ranganath Mishra, who went on to become Chief Justice of India and ironically the first chairman of the NHRC. Right? Now that man indulged in a very blatant cover-up. as is evident from some of the actions that are very hard to believe today. That here was a commission that was set up about 6 months after the violence took place, because the then administration was bent on milking it politically. So after they finished holding Lok Sabha elections within a couple of months of the carnage in Delhi and elsewhere, they waited for a round of assembly elections in several states to take place, and it was only after that, after they won those 2 rounds of polling, did they actually concede this demand of holding an inquiry, and that too because the then Akali leader Longowal put it as a precondition for entering into any talks. When he finally conceded this demand, look at the shameless manner in which a sitting judge of the Supreme Court played this very dubious game of the executive. What did he do? He announces without any justification whatsoever that the entire inquiry will be held in camera. Now this violates one of the most basic tenets of any credible judicial process, that it has to be held in, the hearings have to be held in public, right? There should be public allowed to come there, media should be allowed to come there, right? It should be reported, on a real-time basis. That is what will give credibility, and that is what will give a sense of assurance to the victims and other concerned people that some justice is being done, right? But the way they went about it was no, nothing will be, it was all, the whole process was shrouded in secrecy, and what came out of it was a shameless whitewash. And because it was something that the government, despite its brute majority in parliament, would have found it hard to justify, to defend, they did not even allow any discussion on it. And when 2002 happened, there wasn't much for BJP to go by. I mean, this is, it would be a case of a pot calling the kettle black.
Yeah. So coming back to the Vajpayee government.
Yeah. So they ordered, in an unprecedented move, they ordered a fresh inquiry, and that is how Justice Nanavati Commission was set up. And because of the context in which a second commission of inquiry was being set up, Nanavati Commission, unlike, the irony is, the same Nanavati shortly thereafter was appointed to inquire into the 2002 violence, right, in Gujarat. There he was behaving more like Mishra behaved in 85, 86, right. Even as we speak, in 2018, we are yet to see Nanavati Commission's report on the 2002 violence, the post-Godhra violence. We are yet to see that report. All we have so far is the first, installment of it, which was limited to Godhra violence. The post-Godhra violence, the retaliatory killings of Muslims that happened across Gujarat, that report has still not been made public, right? So in the context of 84, he did a more credible inquiry. He held the inquiry in public domain, and a lot of reports that were not made public earlier came into public domain for the first time, and that is how finally, post Nanavati report, Phulka and I put together this report on the basis of all this documentation that became available after almost 2 decades.
Thank you very much for your efforts in actually improving and sharing that documentation with the wider readership. Hartosh, coming back to you, under the present government, where we'd expect a very vigorous prosecution of everyone who's been implicated in the violence 34 years ago, it doesn't seem like that is actually being delivered. Jagdish Titler, whose name has by now become synonymous with the riots, has received another clean chit from the CBI, and an SIT that was formed in 2015 and which was announced by Modi just before the Delhi elections, but was formed in 2015, has found that most of the cases that I believe it recommended only that 12 of the cases be reopened out of something like 290. Without getting too much into technicalities, what is your reading of what this investigation means to the present government, and what is the level of good faith behind it?
Let's look at the larger picture, and it's not just the present government. We should also look at the present opposition, which is the Congress, in the current context. One is, of course, it would be wrong to say one would have expected vigorous investigation. It's clear from the background we've set out that no government would actually do a clear investigation. Investigating 84 also reflects on the lack of investigation in 2002. Let me point out one simple thing. On October 31st, you can look at the Twitter handles of both Rahul Gandhi and Narendra Modi. This is a pattern from the time Rahul Gandhi started his Twitter activity 4 years ago and Narendra Modi 10-15. There will be a message about the death of Indira Gandhi. From November 1st to November 3rd, 8,000 citizens of this country were killed. There's not a single tweet either by Rahul or Narendra Modi. Yeah? And you have to understand why Narendra Modi is not tweeting. He does not dare to talk about this. He does not dare to prosecute. That SIT was set up to preempt an SIT by the AAP government, which would actually have been independent of the control of the BJP or the Congress. And finally, the courts had to intervene and say this SIT hasn't done its job. Modi was as interested in suppressing the truth of 84 as the Congress is. What is also equally important that if you look at the opposition, please do not think that the history of the Congress, that 84 has lied suppressed in the past. It is alive today in the Congress. Kamal Nath today is leading the campaign in Madhya Pradesh for the Congress. He is directly indicted in the one clear case of a man leading a mob that burnt two people to death right next to Parliament. The party gains and profits from 84, will never make excuses for it. It may pretend otherwise. It never will own up to the simple fact, because 84 was directed from the top downward. It indicts the Gandhi family, and the Congress will never be able to walk away from it. So in that sense, the opposition and the current administration both are implicit in the suppression of truth in this case. Complicit.
That troubling note leaves us with an explanation of how things have played out so far and what to expect for the campaign for justice for the victims of 1984. Thank you, Hartosh. Thank you, Manoj. For more coverage of 1984 and the campaign for justice today, visit thewire.in or click on the links below and subscribe.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.